Oh boy, we are here at Icons of Darkness at the mall at Hollywood and Highland, and we are so excited. Icons of Darkness was one of our favorite events of Halloween 2020, but it was a non-event. After the previews we attended, it was canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now it's a year later, they're in a new location, it's open for business, it's absolutely fabulous. We're gonna walk through, take a look at it. Come along with us, if you dare. Icons of Darkness is kind of nerd heaven. What I mean by that is there are all kinds of iterations of our famous characters. We all know what Batman looks like, right? But if you look carefully, he changes from film to film. You want to come through here, if you're really a nerd, you want to show your geek cred, you should be able to identify these different costumes. Which Batman film is that from? Well, it's a bit of a cheat because there's the answer right there, but the real nerds among you aren't going to need the cheat sheets. This is one of my favorite displays because it's from one of my favorite movies, The Dark Knight, with Christian Bale as Batman and Heath Ledger as the Joker. Absolutely fabulous movie that takes comic book material and turns it into something more film noir. It's like a Michael Mann crime thriller. It's just absolutely spectacular. So I really enjoy seeing these figures. These are Gremlins, as you can tell, but are they from Gremlins 1 or Gremlins 2? Well, as a matter of fact, they're from Gremlins 2, the one that Rick Baker did the effects for. That was the second film, had a bigger budget. Rick Baker, Oscar-winning makeup man, special effects guy. Of course, they're going to go with the top of the field when they can afford him. This is a T-Rex head from The Lost World, Jurassic Park 2. This was back in the days before CGI had totally taken over special effects. Sure, there was a lot of digital animation in the Jurassic Park films, but also a lot of full-size mechanical effects built by Stan Winston. This one is absolutely spectacular, big as life, very convincing. Almost afraid he'd bite me if I reached a little bit too far, so I think I'm just going to move on now. The thing about the collection here at Icons of Darkness is these are actual props, not recreations. And a lot of times movie props and special effects, they're not made to last. They aren't made to sit in museums for decades. They're made to last as long as it takes to make the movie. You take a closer look at this T-Rex here, the one from the first Jurassic Park, you're gonna see some wear and tear around the eyes. The guy looks like he needs a little bit of a facelift. Although actually I shouldn't say the guy because we know all the dinosaurs are female in Jurassic Park because that's the way the geneticists bred them. Darth Vader, right? From Empire Strikes Back? You probably think that's from the film, but it's not. This is what they call a touring suit. You know, these characters got to make personal appearances sometimes, and they don't wear the same costume that's in the movie necessarily. So the crew, the costume people, they make what they call the touring version, and it looks pretty damn convincing. Just between you and me, Greedo did not shoot first. This is the Metalunan from This Island Earth, a 1950s science fiction film, one of the few in color, had a little bit bigger budget than most movies of that time. He's quite an iconic creature. And, you know, the movie itself is a little bit dated, but it's a lot of fun. This is just an indication that this collection includes recent stuff, classics, things from all eras, things from different genres. There's horror, there's science fiction, there's fantasy, superheroes, Terminators, just about everything under the sun. You know, in the Star Trek series, Bones McCoy, for some reason, he had trouble with this whole Vulcan salute thing, which isn't really that hard to do. He was always like messing with this. It's not a big deal. Live long and prosper. Behind me through this door is what we might call the dungeon. There's going to be scarier stuff back here, you know, from the really gruesome grisly movies. I guess they sequestered it a little bit because this is a family-oriented show. They don't want to terrify the kiddies, so maybe they can, you know, do a little bypass and skip that stuff. But we're braver people, so we're going to go through and see what it's like. Oh boy, Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. You know, no supernatural elements in that one, but it's so scary and he's so crazy, but in a way he's so sane. It truly is a horror film of a very special kind. Okay, I know, you're expecting me to do a Jack Nicholson impersonation, but I just can't. I don't have the talent, sorry. But you certainly recognize Jack Torrance from The Shining, one of my favorite horror films of all time, thanks to director Stanley Kubrick.
Here's Johnny!
Wow, original costumes that Doug Bradley wore in Hellraiser. He certainly became one of the most iconic figures in the history of horror cinema, which is interesting because in the first movie, he's not that big a deal. I mean, he's memorable, but he's only got a limited amount of screen time, and the credits just list him as like first Cenobite or something like that. It was only later that he became officially known as Pinhead, which the fans had been calling him all along. You probably don't need me to identify Pennywise from It, the theatrical feature film. There was a miniseries back in the 80s with Tim Curry in the role. He was fabulous in it. The show, not too bad, but this thing really took off. It became something much bigger than it had been before. Of course, based on the lengthy Stephen King novel, which director William Friedkin, the man who made The Exorcist, called the Moby Dick of horror novels. Freddy Krueger, he was my favorite horror character of the 80s. That was a decade that was filled with slashers, masked madmen who had nothing to say, just ran around with knives or machetes, hacking teenagers to bits. Freddy was a dream demon. There was surrealism in those films. There were some really fascinating special effects, and he was a really fascinating character. A disgusting, evil one, but interesting. This is Freddy Krueger as he appeared in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the film that tried to reimagine Krueger as an eternal dream demon, not just the sleazy child predator who had been burned to death by the angry parents in the first film. You remember how I talked about geek credibility here, about how the monsters appear in different versions as they make sequels and so forth? Can you tell which alien this is, which movie it's from? I can. It's the very original Alien, as seen in the 1979 film with designs by H.R. Giger. We know this because the exposed skull, which actually isn't visible in the movie. It was covered a little bit with a translucent, top, and they lit it deliberately to give you at most a shadowy impression of what was underneath. But this was very much part of the design, and we all know this because the toys that we used to be able to buy at Toys R Us showed it quite clearly. But this you will not see in the later versions of Alien, such as Aliens and Alien 3 and so forth. Okay, can you identify this alien? You should be able to after what I just told you, right? We can see the skull. Unlike the one we saw a second ago, this one does have the covering, but it's very clear, unlike in the movie where, it was a little bit foggy. But definitely the original Alien designed by Giger. Not the original Alien. But you knew that now, right? Lon Chaney is the Phantom of the Opera from the 1925 film adaptation of Gaston Leroux's novel. This is the only one that allowed the character to pretty much be the way he was in the book, kind of deformed from birth, not someone who had a terrible accident, someone who grew up with this deformity, and it turned him into the crazed but brilliant madman that he is. Okay, behind me is what I guess we're going to call the Universal Horror section of Icons of Darkness. These are the monsters that Universal Pictures made into movies in the 1930s. Dracula with Bela Lugosi, Frankenstein starring Boris Karloff, and then a few years later in The Bride of Frankenstein, he was joined by Elsa Lanchester as the bride. Obviously, these aren't original figures. Those movies were made decades ago, but they're pretty fabulous, and it's great to see them here if you love old-style horror. These are what they call life masks. In the days before CGI, when we depended on makeup, an actor had to sit down and have a plaster cast made. It was a bit of a process. The actor had to wait 3 hours underneath the plaster for it to dry. And from that, they would make these life masks, which the makeup man could then use building little bits of clay or prosthetics or whatever and applying them to these masks. And it resulted in people being able to make custom-made makeup that would perfectly fit the actor in question. We're at the end of the tour of Icons of Darkness. Apparently there were some concerns about it being too intimidating for the youngsters, so they wanted to end on a happy note, and what's happier than E.T.? Anyway, we really love this. The location in Hollywood and Highland, it's not as big as the Montalban Theater, which is where this was supposed to appear last year, but they certainly fit a lot of stuff in it. We still highly recommend it. We were disappointed that it didn't happen last year. Wow. Watch out for the scares. There are some scares we didn't show you because we don't want to give away, the surprises here. But not all of this stuff is static. There are some mechanical effects. Some things move and they will scare you. But like we said, if the kids get too scared, E.T. will comfort them before they head home.